Well, we are once again lighting the candle, a world that works. And I'm Bill Carell, and I'm here with a couple of my buddies, Lisa and Ken. And between us, the three of us, I think and also with Lisa and a few other contributors over the last two and a half years, I think we're up to almost 140 episodes at this moment, right in that ballpark. So with that said, we've had a little bit of a hiatus for a couple of weeks with things going on in some of our lives, and I just thought maybe today it would be good to talk about how life has this tendency to interrupt what it is you think you should be working on. It's like as John Lennon once said, "Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans." That's in the lyrics of "Beautiful Boy." And there's Jan. So anyhow, we're going to say hi to you, Jan, online here, and you're free to just sit and lurk if you like. Okay. So in the meantime, we're just talking about how life has this, you know, it's like an unstoppable force of nature. It just keeps lifing at you. Can't shut it off. Can't take a time out. It's just going to keep doing what it's doing. And that many times tends to be an interruption. And I think personally, working on a couple of projects that have had interruption after interruption after interruption. One I'm working on has kind of stayed exactly the way that it was with the plans that we made in November. And we're still finally just getting that stuff done and getting all of the documentation and all of the government signups and everything complete. So if you like that idea, you want to talk a little bit about life and the way that it shows up as an interruption, or maybe the way that it doesn't, or maybe the way that it shows up some other way.
I always like the saying of if you want to make God laugh, just tell her your plans.
Yes. Yeah. We, we also used to say if you declare something to the universe, that you have a much better opportunity to actually have it occur. But first, she's going to say, we'll just see about that.
Gonna, gonna test your level of commitment.
With tsunami force. So I'll kick off. This time last year, my dad and his wife were living down in Florida, and we used to have these, a couple times a week, telephone calls, FaceTime calls, and we'd sing to each other and have fun, and everything was great. And they were self-sufficient and on their own. And right about now, the family started getting interested because Mary Ann said, we'd like to move back to Connecticut. And so there were a couple of weeks, for that to really become a gelled idea, and for my dad to get with the program and say, yeah, I guess I'll leave my beautiful home in Florida and go back to Connecticut to who knows what. But they did. And from there, the family mobilized and helped to empty out their house with 95% of all of their furnishings and everything about 2 months before they put the house on the market. So you can imagine. And a little bit background story. My dad has been totally blind for 5 years. He's a wonderful, wonderful man with a great history and everything. And he was totally blind since about 2018. So there they are, and they're really excited about doing something. They put the house on the market, and it sells, and then they come to Connecticut, and the trip really, really, really bogged them down, and they both had health issues for about a month and a half. And then my dad came out of it. But this was like a 7-month process from this time last year where they declared, yeah, it sounds easy to just go to Connecticut, right? Well, just go to Connecticut. Well, they're finally in Connecticut. They've got everything in an equilibrium. It's working. They're pretty healthy. They've got the normal ailments that you have when you're pushing 90 years old. Uh, but it's phenomenal to have conversations with him now. And the hard part of it is this isn't the dad that I've known, for my whole lifetime. It's another man, and I don't mean that in any other way, that his thought processing is different now. He's much more accepting. He's a lot quicker to laugh. He's a pleasure, to be around and hang out with, because he now, for the probably the first time since I've known him, he can laugh at himself. That's after 5 or 6 years of resisting. So the I think the neat part of it is I've had things going on in my personal life as well, but he's kind of like uh, he's a very empowering look at what, um, when you get totally stopped in life, how you can come back and find enjoyment just in the day to day and the little things, and just a conversation. For example, he probably says, I love you," more than he did for the first 40 or 50 years, that we were together. And it's really, really cool. So there's an interruption. And a pretty long story.
Yeah, I don't know. It kind of feels like life just is interruptions. And it's just about, how present we are as we navigate them. It's, I mean, it's just always interesting to me how you can be moving towards things, and then, you can't predict how or if you're going to get there, and halfway through sometimes you realize wasn't what you wanted anyway. So like sometimes those interruptions create a pause where you can reflect, you know is this still right? Is this the appropriate way to be traveling, and does it fit? I was just having a conversation with someone about that. I was doing a little bit of coaching, and she's trying to figure out why she exercises instead of just knowing she should be exercising. And and we talked about that in terms of the greater integration of the other things that she values. And she said an interesting thing. She said the person that she'd worked with previously, one of they gave her like a questionnaire, and one of the things was, what are the things that you'd be willing to give up in service to exercising? And that was kind of an interesting approach, because I was thinking, isn't it more about what are you not willing to give up, and how does exercising serve you? Like, how does this integrate instead of compartmentalizing? And I wonder if sometimes we're so busy doing that we forget the being part. And then those interruptions just give us a second to kind of catch our breath and think, wait a minute, you know?
I think it's so much about mindset. Like falls into what you were saying, Ken. I've changed my mindset about a lot of things. Like getting up early in the morning is horrible, and I'm a night person. That was a lie I told myself for decades, quite frankly. And yesterday, with the bad weather and stuff, because at the beginning of the year I decided to do the steps. I bought into an app, and so I'm trying to do the 10,000 steps. And I hate, just my sister likes to jog in place, and I hate that. I need to go for a walk. So I've been walking first thing in the morning and for my lunchtime too. And yesterday with the weather, I just went, I'm addicted to walking. I need to walk now. And it's a great change for me. I'm not losing anything. I'm gaining everything. And I'm questioning myself, like your client was, Ken, is like, what makes me, I have a different perception of exercising. It's not taking anything away. It's adding everything to my life. So, and once your brain accepts that and you twist it to that, I find joy in just the walking itself. And everything it's almost hard to describe because I'm looking at it from a different perspective, but it's a great different perspective.
I really appreciate you bringing that up now, as a matter of fact. I've been thinking about my lack of mobility and exercise for the last 3 or 4 months, and I'm finally healthy and well. I have virtually no symptoms at all after 5 or 6 weeks of having head congestion and pretty sure I had a sinus infection and what have you. But the really neat part of it is that we're kind of thrown to use the Richard Simmons deal a meal sort of thing. You know, we got to trade this for that, and but there's another way to look at it, and that if you live a life that's about having everything that you want and everything that you're willing to apply yourself to, then it can become a game as opposed to just having plans that of course life is going to interfere with you. And somebody said that in a seminar that I was in, if you want to if you want to never fail, don't ever do anything, you know. And for a lot of people, how they forego life's interruptions is they don't make plans. It's like, you know, why have something where you create the tension between what your expectation was and what actually is going on? Why be even interested in what your intention was if what's going on right now, if it takes you away from being present? So the really interesting thing in hearing what you had to say, Ken, is that if somebody is saying, "What would you be willing to give up to get, X?" What line of questioning is that? And what's the intended consequence or the intended result of asking somebody if they'd be willing to trade and how much would it be? It just seems like scarcity mentality to me, and one where it's this big, it can get no bigger, and we're certain of that until it does get bigger, and then wow, I'm a night person, and getting up early in the morning's not for me. That's how I went to college.
And one thing we did talk about was there is a place for that if it's performance specific. Like, the first 6 months of starting up a new business, especially if it's, something bigger than just yourself, you're probably going to give up a lot of things like sleep and, relationships. And it's, in service, or at least you have to be ready because it's something that's kind of unusual in the amount of energy you have to direct towards it. So if you're, a professional athlete, you probably do have to give things up to maintain an unusual level of performance, for a period of time. So, and that's kind of what I asked her. Are you training for something? Or are you just practicing living your life? And then, it's just so we talked about the whole, model of move, think, connect, feel, empower, and how those aren't separate things that you check as boxes. They're integrated things that support and amplify each other. And you just practice them as best you can each day, knowing that a game may or may not show up. And even if it does, you probably aren't going to know what the rules are anyway. So, so, you know,
Perfectly
it's going to be
said.
what it's going to be. You
Yeah, at the beginning of anything, Ken, you're not going to be very good at it, which means that although you think
Yeah.
spending more time doing things that aren't making a difference is a good trade-off for being with somebody you love, um, that might not be your most inspired thinking, because what most people do during the first 6 months to a year that they do anything, they do all the wrong things, but they do a lot of it,
Mhm.
and they do all kinds of diversity in terms of doing the wrong things. That after you've gotten to that 3, 4, 5 year, you can get stuff done in an hour or two a day, where you used to work 50, 60 hours a week.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. I'm finding like this is my second year like doing this obstacle course racing thing, and the amount of mental energy I need to invest is like 20% of what it was last year. Because
Oh,
I know like I did all the research, I learned how to train, I figured out how my body responds. So now it's just committing to, just having good strategies for how to practice and, prepare for each leg of this little thing that I'm doing, But you're right, it's kind of interesting how there are times where there's more of an energetic commitment, at the beginning of things, but that's also a fun and exciting time because it's new, you know, and then it shifts. So, and it's always interesting, like when you have, so when the challenges come up, especially there's resistance created that can um the resistance can inform you if you're listening. So you get sick or you have an injury, and then it's like, okay, what is this trying to tell me right now? Or what can I learn for it? It's not necessarily that it's you did anything wrong, but it's an opportunity, you know, to work with that resistance and figure out, how to leverage it, I guess.
Well, that also is somebody who has some mastery who's talking now. Mostly they're just being upset, and suffering during that period of time when you can't do what you want to do, and why did I do this? How stupid am I? And those all those self-talk things that a novice is going to do that somebody who has some mastery will not. Having
Oh, I
mastery
do
means
those
always
things.
finding, pardon me?
I do those things. Absolutely. That's very human. The frustration and,
Yes.
all of those feelings and even the self-talk, like I kind of try to picture that now as like a luxury, so like getting down or being frustrated or just railing at something that's beyond your control. But I don't know, I feel like it's healthy once in a while to just vent.
A
you
a
know,
100%.
I just don't do it at another person. It's like it's but I don't know. I mean, you got to let off the pressure a little bit and then I guess it's the reframing on the other side of it. Do you stay there? Is it serving you or are you serving it? I guess that's where the mastery part comes in from, the real wise people that I know, even if they have a response, they'll stop and they'll be like, that was interesting. What was that about? They'll explore it, like even right in front of you.
Yeah.
So they don't live there or defend it. They just observe it, acknowledge it, and then they move on. So it just becomes another learning experience for them.
And the other neat thing that you're saying, Ken, is that with mastery comes the ability to put a question in place where a complaint would normally live.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll
Now, how
do
much
the
time
Yeah.
do I want to spend?
Lots of questions. Yeah.
and I've done the oh, who are you? When some emotion comes up and sit with
Mhm.
that one for a minute. And that,
Yeah.
that took a long time to even be aware that there was something. And I've been taking a philosophy class and we do a practice, which is just like centering into the five senses basically. And they tell you to do it a couple times a day and it wasn't really falling into place. So anytime I got distracted, like even at work, if something on the computer or if a thought came into my mind, I used that as a moment to do the practice. And even if I was walking and a loud sound, it could be a nature sound, got me. I would find the nearest bench and do the practice again. So any type of distraction I used as a practice, a time to practice my practice kind of thing. So it's all how you look at everything and then talk to the emotion that might have gotten me there if that was the distraction.
Waves are less scary when you know how to surf.
You're waiting for the big ones now.
Yeah, right. Oh, you
Exactly.
got
Yeah. You
Lieutenant
look
Dan.
forward to them. And really, the only difference between the big wave and the little wave is your level of skill. I mean, that's what your relationship to it is based on your understanding of and willingness to become more and more skillful over time. Your capacity goes up.
And your ability to predict a successful outcome based on
Mm.
prior experience, which isn't always,
Yeah.
future performance does not necessarily equal a past performance. So
I can remember that racing mountain bikes there, especially like at nationals, place like Mount Snow or something. There'd be a couple downhills, and I'm like, I'm getting off the bike and running. I know what's going to happen if I try to go down this on two wheels. I will be in front of the bike on my head. And you're right, you do, and that's from having figured out where the edges are of your capability, and then actually respecting those edges.
right.
You know, and also being okay, kind of dancing on the edge and going a little too far and then you pay a little price and you move on.
Yeah, and you have the choice to risk
Yeah.
or to be more conservative. And that's
Yep.
what a lot of people don't understand. They get on on a roller coaster and then they decide to get off midway before the ride's over, you know? And that's what life seems like to people at times when you certainly don't have any control. And rarely do people throw their hands up in the air and go, "Wee, this really sucks." Yeah. Yeah, rarely. But if you do that, what you've just done is you've interrupted the interruption.
Hmm.
As Lisa said, use it to get back to whatever your practice is.
And that's basically moving into the present moment, which is the only time we have really, that takes a long time to realize that the present moment is all we have. We were talking about happiness being innate on my class, and then I think we've talked about that kind of like, is love always there or is happiness always there? And we came to the conclusion as a class that it was innate. And but you and to experience happiness is always in the moment, but there are so many people having a hard time with saying that that's not true, that you can have a happiness in other moment, but and it's hard to explain to someone that no, but even if you're experiencing, if you're remembering it, you're happy in the moment now, what I mean? So being in the present moment is hard to hold on to sometimes, and hard to realize that that's the only place we have to live, kind of thing.
I think that is one of the foster children of the 1960s. Get out of high school and then go find yourself.
Yeah.
As if there's any possible way to do that. And I guess for most people who I don't know, I had a couple of guys in my class that backpacked the world. I mean, they basically went over to Europe and they went hostel to hostel and they did it for 6 or 8 months. And when they came back, they had a lot more stories, that were pertinent to life in their opinion than they'd had going through a traditional, 12-year high school experience or grammar school to high school experience. But in the meantime, what I love about what you're saying, Lisa, is that um, the fundamental challenge to the human condition is the ability to just choose now
Mhm.
for all it is and all it isn't.
And I was listening to another workshop where the guy said when he got out of college and it took him like 8 months to find a job. And once he found a job, he's never stopped. So looking back, he wish he would have enjoyed that 7 to 8 months of just living and looking and experiencing life from that point of view. But it's just looking, I don't know, if you relish the moment for what it is, kind of thing.
Well, I'm going to be 69 years old next week. And
Yay.
yeah, thanks. The notion of just being a vagabond for a year and experiencing other human beings than the ones that I've been experiencing through this whole time, and maybe giving up doing projects for a while, you know, and just hang out with people for the sake of hanging out with them. And you network for a purpose, one way or the other. There's something that's going on there. But just traveling around, I did it for 10 days a year ago, summer, or actually 14 days. I drove down to Florida by way of Annapolis and Lexington, Kentucky, and then visited with about 10 or 12 of my old friends that I hadn't seen for quite a long time. And just randomly chose where I was driving next and call them up and say, "Hey, I'm on my way. Is that okay?"
Mhm.
And what I really enjoyed about that was the quiet time in the car in between, where I left and the destination. Sometimes I drove 11, 12, 13 hours in a day. Sometimes I drove an hour and a half, plus all the other people that I got to meet, random folks like at grocery stores or filling up gas and the gal behind the counter, especially through South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia. They are wonderful, beautiful human beings. And they always made me feel, especially with my white beard, always made me feel very welcome.
I think that was part of like the hurdle that Ken was talking about, like the research when you start something, but I think that's the part that a lot of people don't get over.
Right.
They hit that first hurdle and they stop, like you were saying, Bill, too. Like people just don't move forward or they're too afraid or something. So I think, think the best kind of thing I've seen is that you have to take that hurdle. It might be the highest, hardest hurdle there is, but to just do it and then see how it goes. But if you don't start, like you said, Bill, you never finish if you don't start. So just I mean, that's been my biggest realization is that I put myself up to challenges and then meet them. It's because I have that personality that if I start something, I need to finish it. But for so many years, I didn't even start anything. So there was no joy at the end of accomplishing something, and that to me was so when I hit those challenges, I was living in those moments to get that result kind of thing. And I think that's basically how life is supposed to be, discovering your new moments and the new obstacles and the new challenges to meet. Because you're not supposed to stay stagnant, that's for sure. Nothing in nature likes stagnant.
Yeah, while you're speaking, what I was thinking about was I whenever I tried something new, like whether when I first started my business, or I'll go back even before that. I came out of high school, had 2 years of college, met my wife, and then started working third shift in a factory. And every time there was an opportunity for me to try to do something new, I went for it. But I was sure I would never graduate from college, so I never went to class at the University of Colorado. That was a $4,500 vacation for me for 1 year. And quite frankly, it's all education. It's experience, life's experience. And what I found was, it's pretty clear that the things that I tried and I really applied myself to, and if I stuck with it, I'd get it done. But I didn't get that lesson until after I had decided that I really wasn't going to give it a shot at engineering school. So when I got into my own business, I started using that newfound technology that got me moved up, working in other people's manufacturing companies. But I found that the first time of doing anything was always the hardest.
Hmm.
What I also found was where other people would quit after 4, 5, 6 tries. I read the Thomas Edison life story again, and the whole he never tried to do 1,000 light bulbs, but he probably did 4 or 500. And the fact of the matter is that the formula, I got asked to talk about the formula of accomplishment, and 3 steps. One, make your mind up.
Mm.
Two, do it until it's done. Three, appreciate and learn how you got that done. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, they're a bunt. They're simple, and it's good for business. It's good for real estate. I had 13 cars at one point. It was a big deal for me to set a goal to have my first roadster sports car, Mercedes SL. And I thought it was going to take me 5 years to get it. I had it in 9 months,
Ooh.
you know. But the point is what you give good solid attention to in the present and utilize what's going on in the present, to accomplish that. And then, like the video games where the you keep getting knocked off of, off to the side of the road, and you got to come back again and get your speed back up, and finding joy in the getting going again. I think for me was the big shift that made it so much simpler to get back going again. And I had this mind picture of having a Nintendo button in my brain where if it's not working, I just press reset and get a new Mario and go again.
Rerouting like your GPS.
Exactly.
You guys ever hear of a book by Seth Godin called The Dip?
No.
I've heard of it. I've
It's
heard you
it's
speak
a
about
yeah, he wrote it a while back and it was really interesting. The premise of the book is actually to quit early. And his reasoning behind it was when you start something, it's fun, it's interesting, it's all new. So it's kind of feels a little downhill, but then you get to that point where the work begins, where it gets hard and so now you're in the dip and you've got to climb back out. And he said most people quit when they're in the dip, and he said if you can recognize earlier on that it's not something that you want to pursue, just quit before you end up in the dip and you're stuck, doing hard work that may be unnecessary. And it was just a really interesting perspective on it, because I remember, I read it because I like him and I like his work, but I was like, I don't quit things. You know. So I had this like resistance to the idea. But then as I read the book, it was very interesting. It made a lot of sense. And it especially struck me how, if you're, well, I know for me it's, no is a tough thing to say. I want to say yes to everything. And, and this is kind of training for that. It's having, refining your ability to discern when no is the appropriate thing, or when changing your mind is the appropriate thing. So he wrote it a while back. I mean, it was probably 15 years ago that he wrote the book, but definitely an interesting read.
Most of his stuff is.
Oh yeah, no, I love him. He's just so insightful, and you know,
Well,
he's thoughtful, and he's generous, and he's he's conscientious in the way that he presents information. He's not shouting to be heard. He's speaking for, to help people, just he's creating thought-provoking conversation instead of just blasting out opinions and telling you what you think. It's very refreshing.
yeah, the 10x philosophy is something that I've always appreciated. And when people, I'll speak for me. I used to just make deals with myself. I give it a shot, you know? And what I found was I started a lot of things, didn't finish very much. So, shifting it from, if I think to get this result, it's going to take me twice what I'm willing to put into it, or three times what I'm willing to put into it, I won't go there. But if the result that I do achieve has the potential of giving me 10 times, whatever I put into it, once I've got a modicum of skill with it, well, maybe that's worth going through that uncomfortable period of time. So somebody once said to me, was a good friend, and he had an antique store over in Columbia. He's passed, but he said, the guy's 45 years old. And he says, I'm going to learn how to dunk a basketball. And I said, Don, I know you're tall enough. I said, what do you think you're going to have to do? He says, I don't know. I installed the basket over here on the side of where the antiques are. And he said, I'm over there jumping at it probably 40, 50 times a day. And I said, how are you doing? He says, I'm not very good. And he said, you want to try it? I said, Don, I can't dunk a basketball. I could never get this big butt of mine up in the air to be able to get that thing through the hoop. Not at my age. So there we were, the two of us, both of us in our mid 40s, insanely trying to dunk this basketball. And the ball's hitting into antiques and all over the place. And finally I said, well, look, I don't want to buy anything off of your floor here, if I break it. So I'll watch you for a little while. But he was an inspired man, I'll tell you. I got a lot of nice wood furniture from him. That's back in the day, I think it was worth a few bucks. Now it just gives me joy to look at it. I don't think it's worth very much these days because nobody likes real old, but not Chippendale type furniture. So that
Did
was
he ever
inspiring.
do it?
Huh?
Did he ever do it?
I don't know. We lost contact with each other for a few years. And then I ran into him because I'd moved down to Florida. And then I ran into him over at the grocery store, and he had a patch over his eye. Well, this poor man had developed cancer, at first in one eye and then both. And he was over and done with in a year and a half. But I had so much fun with him. And he was, early on when I first started my business and he was starting his business, we would spend hours, sharing coffee with each other, common stories, talking about collecting, and you know, as I had a little bit of free income here and there, I invested in different things, including stamps and coins and a little bit of art, and some some reasonably decent furniture. But I always used one philosophy. I never worried about if I could afford it. I never worried about whether I was going to make money or lose money. I always just wanted to buy something that I would enjoy looking at for the rest of my life. And it didn't turn out to be a really bad idea, and in some cases, especially the coins, it turned out to be a very good idea, because I liquidated about 30 years worth of collecting about 10 years ago, and it did okay. you know
Oh,
so in the meantime, what I'm curious about is is there a current story or something that comes to mind where, and I loved what you said, Ken, where you actually take the time to rag yourself out for a little while, and and just kind of bathe in all of that negative self-talk, and like really almost like you're like another person talking to yourself, because what comes out of your mouth to other people is not almost never any of that stuff. So I could see how that would be delicious for you, just for a few minutes, to sit there and go, "You butthead, what's wrong with you? You'll never amount to anything. You can't ride a bike. You can't run up and down a mountain."
No, I think I guess it's like everything. It's just figuring out where, how to strengthen by, oscillating back and forth through the I don't know, through conflicting things that lead to balance. So, like if you're too positive and optimistic all of the time, you become brittle. I remember Admiral Stockdale talking about that. He said the people that didn't survive in the POW camp he was in were the optimists who kept saying, "We'll be out by Christmas, we'll be out by Easter," and they didn't last. There had to be kind of you know, a belief that you would somehow get free with the pragmatic reality of your situation and the fact that there's no real end in sight, So so it's interesting. I think that, I early on, I definitely found myself working a little too hard to be positive all the time. Um, and it it stresses you out. It's like they're finding out now. I mean, a lot of people are experiencing like personal development work is actually making people more depressed because they're consuming so much of it. It's setting up kind of a false understanding of what it means to be a positive person who's experiencing balance in your life. So, you know, my mentor always said it's spiritual weightlifting. It's like when you realize you're not present, the act of bringing yourself to presence, that's resistance training. That's what
Yeah.
strengthens your ability to do that. You don't live there. You move in and out of it more gracefully over time and more skillfully, I guess.
Yep. I like that a lot. The one of the neatest things for me to get, when and if I did, was that I wasn't a very good listener for a very long time. I was really very interested in listening to my thoughts in my head and preparing to say the most profound and amazing thing once the other person was done speaking. And so, I mean, obviously that didn't go very well. And one of the courses that I went through was about dedicating yourself to service. And service is getting out of your skin and over into the other person's world, and not only listening, but doing empathetic listening and active listening and all these things. And so I asked a question. I said, I get all this, and I really am interested in being of service to other people. I said, but I can't shut my head off. And everybody laughed and said, "Well, neither can we," you know. And so the guy said, "He said that's not a problem, you know. When your mind is drifting away, you just notice that, and then decide to come back, and that gets to be a habit over a period of time." And what I found was the thought that I was working so hard to construct was nowhere near as interesting as what was actually going on in the conversation until I really found myself being immersed in the back and forth to the point where making a point was kind of the booby prize, you know? It's like it just doesn't matter. But the whole notion of being able to interrupt a behavior that you're doing that's not present and making yourself present. I love spiritual weightlifting, self-correction, the putting the the early warning device so that you get like the gas tank is half empty. Now come back, it's time to fill it.
Well, isn't it interesting how, like, that tension, that feeling of resistance, it's also traction. It lets you know where you are. I mean, it's like if you're running on the road, you ever have those dreams where you're running but you don't feel like you're going anywhere
Hmm.
because there's no traction, there's no grip, there's no feeling of being propelled forwards, which really leaves you kind of, with no center. There's no reference base. So it's interesting how it's, going all the way back full circle to where you started. It's that resistance and that tension that helps. It can bring you present because it tells you where you are. It's like, when you get bad news, you snap into focus. you know like, yeah, that gets you present. You don't need a breathing exercise for that. It's like, whoop, I got to pay attention now. So so, and then of course there's how we frame it, and what work we've put in advance that allows us to navigate, to whatever degree we navigate when it happens. But it definitely gets your attention.
Brings to mind the Mike Tyson quote: "Everybody's got a plan until they get smacked in the face."
Honestly,
And
I find that's one of the best things to get your attention. It's
well,
just competing in the ring.
yeah,
I
you
remember that I was in
don't
the
need
ring
to
after
vote on it,
after I
right?
got hit or kicked. First time you get kicked in the head, it's like, oh yeah, that's why I'm here. It improves your level of focus immensely.
Pay attention now. Pay attention. So, yes, Lisa.
Oh no, I think what Ken was saying about the positive thinking, like almost and personal coaching and all this stuff, life coaching getting to be. But I was at a workshop and the gentleman was saying like we forget to be sometimes. We're so busy reading the next book or doing the next practice and all that other stuff. And like your soul's over there going, oh, look at Lisa reading that self-help book. Isn't that cute? You know, it should be
Yeah.
The the next one is the one that's gonna do the deal.
yeah.
Well, I kinda noticed that in the '90s because, once in the '70s, I got a cassette, player. I started getting, cassette tapes with, peak performance and every kind of thing that you can think of. I've got a library that's probably got 50 different titles. But when I got to the '90s and I got hooked up with Landmark Education, I loved the energy. I loved everyone getting up for the game, to be in this training together. And then I went as far and as fast as I could because I always learned how to overplay, and if they suggested that you do volunteering one day every 2 weeks, then I would do it 3 days a week because I could. And so I'm on the phone talking to people. I'm driving to New York to be there in 2 o'clock in the afternoon to call people from there. And then I'm taking 4 or 5 courses, and some of these courses are $3,000, 4,000, and they're great, and I'm getting my life out of it and everything. And so finally, I we get to the last day of the last course that I attended for a while, And Julia Dieterer, who was the wisdom and partnership instructor, said, "So your answer now is either going to be the future that I want to have is going to be in the next iteration of the wisdom course, or my life is working so well I just want to go out and play." So so when she got over to me, I said, "I'm going to see you, Julia, and I'll stay in touch, but I want to go see if I can really make this apply in my life while I'm not in a course and see what the difference looks like." So that's what I did for about 3 years, and then I went back to it. And for a minute, I thought about going through the training to be able to instruct those courses myself, but I was having too much fun, with everything else that was going on. So that's a response to Lisa, you saying, should we take some time off and go see if this stuff works? Give it a shot. See how you behave.
Well, that's the thing, one of the like whoever, whatever is in front of you is your teacher. So I think if you have the intellect and intuition to look at what's happening, whatever course you're taking, and
Yeah.
if there is a distraction, to say, okay, what is this trying to teach me? And then you'd know, am I supposed to stop? Hopefully, or am I supposed to take a right and a little detour here and learn something out? But you know what I mean? It's just like everything is there to teach you something in that moment. So if you have the ability to see it as such, which is hard to do.
Well, I basically took all of the hours of being in training with other people and being in service, to folks that were going into that training. And then I started with black belt volunteerism, being on as many as a dozen, 15 different boards, including the Salvation Army, Church Vestry, hospital, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then working with people at a statewide level on the neighborhood revitalization zone. Um, and I've just been blessed to always have great folks working with me and to be in the kind of a company and business where I could generate enough to be able to pay for whatever needed to be paid for and build a little bit of a little bit of extra, and then also go out and see what I could do to make a difference in the community, the state, and possibly even the world. All talking. I mean, speaking things into existence, including, statutes that became the pathway for local ordinances to create these neighborhood revitalization zones. And that was rewarding to see that come to fruition, to see people's lives get changed as a result of it. Not because of what I did, but because of what I did to set up the place where they could go do what they needed to do and have it be effective. A little more exciting than just having a good batting average.
It's funny as you're talking about the consuming like all the personal development stuff. I was the same way. And it's interesting how I think one of the seductive things about the doing is it's easy to equate it with a feeling of growth or accomplishment.
Yeah.
And the recovery part, it doesn't feel like anything's happening. It's like you could feel like your muscles getting bigger when you're lifting the weight. There's blood flow in the muscle and you get kind of puffy and pumped up. But that's not actually what's building the muscle. It's sleep. It's eating, protein. It's that, but that doesn't feel like, I don't think we can connect to it the same way. So it kind of makes sense that we would, you know, kind of find ourselves in this kind of overload of yang practices, because when you're just holding space for things to kind of evolve and develop, that's harder. It's just like you're saying, like practicing listening. That's a receiving skill, and it's much easier to feel connected when you're talking, when the thoughts that are in your head are manifesting out. So I think we're kind of wired to struggle with this a little bit, just being human as we are and knowing that sometimes we suck at it, right?
Yeah,
That's a
you said
very empowering statement.
because that was always my like when I was growing up. I think a lot of people had this. You strive for grades, you get the proof that you're good at something, or even at
Yeah, yeah.
athletics, you get the award, or And I was always good at that. And then once I got out of school, and it was like, now what? How am I gonna prove that I'm doing something good or okay? And that I think that's kind of what led me to self-help stuff too, is because I needed a motivation to get something done. And then but so it's a cycle that
Yeah.
you start recognizing yourself. I think that's the ultimate thing.
Yeah.
So I
It-
have a friend who refuses to not finish a book because it's like this sense of having like and I don't remember who said it, but someone years ago said, read the book until you've gotten the point and then put it down.
Oh my god.
There's too many books. So yeah, and I found that really hard at first, but then it actually it works, I mean, it's challenging, but I started looking at a lot of books, especially educational books, and often they're reinforcing the same concept multiple different ways or supporting it with data, and you don't always need it. If you get it and you have a reference base, you can kind of take the main points and move on unless it's really interesting to you. But she was like, no. Once I start a book, I have to finish it even if I hate it. It's just kind of
Well, that's
interesting,
me.
you know.
It's
Yeah.
bound to get better, or I'm gonna miss the nugget. You know. I,
Yeah.
yeah. That approach is really not going to get it done with fantasy and science fiction.
No, no, that's yeah, with leisure reading. Although I I do like leisure reading on a tablet because you can get a preview. So it does give you the ability to read the first 30, 40 pages and then make a decision before you purchase it if you're going to keep going. So it kind of like lets you off the hook.
oh, I don't
So
know.
I've definitely found myself doing that. But yeah, I agree, Bill.
It's amazing. This being interrupted can be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think.
there's a strong correlation between being happy, enjoying, and loving your life, um, and pretty much making it and gamifying it. Because what you said, Lisa, that I heard was in the beginning you got out of high school and now you had to go and find out ways that you could, I'll use my words, demonstrate that you actually were doing things that made a difference and were good, as opposed to focusing on doing things that made you happy.
Yeah,
And
they
can
didn't
you
get
even
that kind of
imagine?
college. That wasn't a
Can you
class.
can you imagine? Giving that advice to a graduating class? If you do things that make you happy, they will make other people happy. And oh, by the way, it will make a difference. So don't pick the hardest thing to accomplish that takes a lifetime. Spend the next 10 minutes laughing, or do both.
Hmm.
So, to that end, my next door neighbor, I probably have talked about him a little bit. Um, both he and his younger sister were preemies. And throughout his entire life, he wound up being a little bit smaller than his older brother, and probably a little less athletic. And then he got into high school swimming. And of course, he picked the very hardest possible thing that there was. He was always straight A's all the way through school because the things that he could control were the things, that he did himself, and very disciplined from a very young age. And so as a result of that, he um, gets into college and he goes pre-med, and he winds up going to medical school at Dartmouth, and he graduates from there, and then he goes to Johns Hopkins. And what does he do? He becomes a baby surgeon, and he's now like 40 years old, and he's one of the most sought after. Uh, and he does most of his operations on preemies, and I just think it's kind of an interesting thing. And he's the guy that always, in my opinion, chose the long distance deal, the hardest thing to possibly do, and then he was at the peak of everything. either valedictorian or salutatorian in both of his undergraduate and graduate collegiate work. Beautiful, beautiful man. Easygoing, a lot of fun, and he tells a damn good joke too. But he's made a huge difference in a lot of babies' lives and their families.
I thought maybe you were going to say he was a sports doctor or something because of his wanting to be because that's what I've heard to do too, is like if you can't do sports, or you're just not inclined physically to be, you can't find the sport that you're right for, then a guy that went to work for the Red Sox or something like that, you know what I mean? He still had
Yes.
his feet in sports, but it just wasn't as a player.
Well, I can tell you this: when he showed up for swim practice when he was 7 and 8 years old, he was never going to be a 50-yard sprinter. And so somewhere along, at those age groups, there were not 100, 200, 500-yard swims. But when he got into high school, his freshman year, he said, "I want to swim the 500." And he said, I'm never going to be a world record holder, in the short distances, either the 50 or the 100. And so the coach basically said, "All right, that's fine with me." And then he did end up being one of the best in the conference, over his 4 years in high school in the 500. It's like,
Wow.
I'll take the hardest thing to do and I'll just keep working at getting better and better and better at it. And it's just such a great story and such a great work ethic, very inspiring. And he was a preemie, and his sister was a preemie. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Jan, I got to acknowledge you being there. It's the hardest thing in the world to look at your beautiful face and not interact with you conversationally. But I want to respect and thank you for being here. It's a joy to have you around. And having done that, all of you people at home, anybody have anything else they'd like to say?
I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah, this was good. It was fun, as always.
Oh, as always. Okay. Well, with that said, we're definitely lighting the candle, a world that works one sentence at a time. And I want to just remind you that during this season, someone would really love it if you gave them a call or texted them or sent them an email and basically said, I love the world because you're in it. And it makes a big difference to me knowing that I can call you up and it matters to me that you're here. So if you all do that, I think we can make this world an even better and safer place. So with that said, I'm going to bid you all fond adieu.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.